Good afternoon. My name is Rob Davis, and I'm a registered nurse from Fort Worth, Texas. I've worked in healthcare for the past 18 years, and the last 10 as a nurse, mainly in the emergency department and intensive care unit. Interestingly, I do have a side job. I moonlight as a comedy magician. Originally, I tried to do comedy without the magic, but every time I did stand-up, they told me to sit down and shut up. It's not funny. But I digress. The reason I'm here to talk to you is to tell you about the way nurses care for their patients and how it relates to you all. What inspired this talk was about a year ago, I woke up and realized I was in a job I couldn't stand anymore. I had spent the last 6 years working as a nurse in an ICU, taking care of patients ranging from open heart surgeries and heart attacks to cancer and overdoses. When I first started there, I was really excited about all the medical treatments and training I'd get. I ended up with hundreds of hours of training in the technical aspects of critical care nursing. But you know what? The one thing I wasn't taught was how to deal with the emotional aspects of the care I provided. In the ICU, I routinely saw death and dying. I saw pain and suffering on the faces of my patients and their families on a daily basis. I began to question the very ethics of keeping people alive, knowing that some would die just days or weeks later. It eventually got to the point where I was no longer effective as a nurse or as a person because I didn't care anymore. Emotionally, I just couldn't care anymore. And you know what? I ended up crashing. Not only did I crash, but I crashed hard. It wasn't the work that caused this, but the way I dealt with the work. And by July, I was as flimsy as a piece of paper, if you will. And one day I had enough. And I walked in and I quit. I quit without another job lined up. And at that point, I felt torn. I felt tattered. I felt crushed. You could say I was completely and utterly burnt out. However, on the other side of this experience, I came out a little worse for wear. A little singed, but I was whole again because I learned something new about caring. What precipitated this learning was reading an essay by Dr. Susan Parenti. In her essay, Redesigning the Character of the Care Actor, she idealistically suggests how to change healthcare to be more caring and less corporate. She discusses the interaction between patient and caregivers having bidirectional care. And she defines it as care moving in two directions, that while the caregiver offers something to the patient offers something to the caregiver in return. This is where she finished and I began. I believe bidirectional care occurs when a nurse truly cares for her patient, not just physically, but truly cares for him on an emotional, psychological, and/or spiritual level. And in doing so, the patient is emotionally fulfilled knowing that someone is truly able to care for them. The nurse is emotionally fulfilled knowing that she was able to truly care for another human being. And more often than not, that patient will care for the nurse in return, either psychologically, spiritually, and/or emotionally. This not only gives meaning to the patient, but it gives meaning to the nurse. And meaning to the nurse-patient relationship is no longer a contractual agreement between patients and a hospital. It's about life and their lives. An important note to make is that we shouldn't care for patients or people because we're cared for in return. That's a byproduct of the whole equation. We should care for patients and people because we are human. Since leaving the intensive care unit, I've been able to care for my patients in so many different ways now. And I've had that privilege. I've been able to share of myself. I've been able to have a genuine conversation with a 91-year-old woman who didn't want to be revived if she were to stop breathing because she feels she's lived a fulfilled life and doesn't need a redo. I've been able to console a World War II veteran who fought in Northern Africa because he was crying over the men he lost there. I've been able to get down on the floor and change out an old Wi-Fi console for a new one because my patient wasn't physically able to do it. That's a true act of caring. Because let's face it, what's life without Wi-Fi, right? And then also as a magician, I've been able to share my art of magic with my patients just to give them a little bit of amazement and a little bit of wonder, just to break the monotony of their day, just to laugh and have a good time. I've had so many great experiences with magic alone that it would take up a whole nother talk on its own. So we'll save that for another time. Since changing the way that I care for my patients, I have been cared for in many different ways. I've had a patient find my personal address and send me cookies for Christmas. I've had another patient pull right out of the oven freshly baked cookies that were delicious. They melted in your mouth. You should see a common theme here by now. I like cookies. And that ain't no joke. I've had a patient take me out to his garage and show me his model train setup he was building. And more often than not, I have patients ask me, how is Rob doing that day? What's going on with me? What's going on with my family? And they truly, genuinely want to know. And I share with them in a general way, but all those ways make me feel cared for. You may ask, why am I so passionate about caring? It's not just because I was burnt out. That's a small part of it. Originally, the reason I became a nurse was in part because of this woman here, Veronica Altramat, my grandmother. She and my grandfather, Robert, raised me from the time I was 5 years old after my mother had passed away. I knew them as Ma and Pa. At the age of 22, I was at a crossroads in my life, trying to figure out whether I wanted to become a nurse or a paramedic. About the same time, Ma was diagnosed with terminal cancer and was placed on home hospice care. Once or twice a week, we had a nurse come out to our home and check to see how Ma was doing. That nurse was Nurse Mary. And it seemed every time that Nurse Mary came into our home, she would sit down and talk to my grandmother for what seemed like a half hour, just about life, what was going on, where they were from, their likes, their dislikes, and raising kids. I remember there was laughing quite a bit. There was some crying, of course, because death was coming, but there was laughing. One moment from this time frame still sticks with me today. I remember Nurse Mary bringing Pa and I around Ma's hospital bed that was set up in our den. And she told us that Ma wouldn't live much longer. She helped Pa and I tell Ma that we loved her, that we were heartbroken, but that we loved her. And it was okay for her to die. We were able to give her permission to go. Ma died a short time later, and I never saw Nurse Mary again. But the care she provided my family in our time of sorrow confirmed my decision to become a nurse. And I now know that Nurse Mary used bidirectional care, even though she didn't have a name for it. That's just who she was and what she did. And I now know that bidirectional care was what brought me into nursing and is what I needed again when I became burnt out, to be a viable, effective, and not just caring nurse again, but a caring person. You may be saying bidirectional care sounds so great and wonderful for healthcare providers. But I say to you, I believe bidirectional care can be used in any circumstance, in any relationship. For example, if a barista at a coffee shop takes a genuine interest in one of their customers and remembers something that's important to them, whether they have 6 dogs, they like skiing, or they're a sword swallower, what have you. And when that customer comes back into the store and the barista brings up that important matter, that customer feels cared for. And that barista feels that much more fulfilled knowing they were able to care for somebody else. And more often than not, that customer will care for the barista in return, in the form of a tip, in the form of a joke, or remembering something that's important to that barista. This relationship is no longer about the buying and selling coffee. It's about life. An important business aspect of this is that customer is more likely to go back to that coffee shop, not just because of good coffee, but because of a relationship. Now that we've talked about bidirectional care, I'd like to share with you an illustration of it. I believe that each and every one of us has an emotional bucket, if you will. As we go about our day, we meet other people that we can care about. We can talk to them. We can listen to them. We can simply give them a smile. We know that we start to fill up their emotional bucket because we've done these acts of caring. But what we don't always realize is as we start caring for others, it also opens up ourselves to be cared for. The more and more we care for other people, the more it becomes second nature. We can laugh with them. We can do a magic trick for them. We can paint them a picture. And that much more, we start to fill up their bucket. And it's important to note that just because we have a preferred method of caring, whether it's listening to someone and talking to them, the way other people care for us may look completely different. The big hindrance I see with bidirectional care in today's society is each and every day we give ourselves huge to-do lists to accomplish. And as we cross off one of those tasks, it seems that the others multiply. We have phone calls to return. We have emails to answer, appointments to make, dinners to get on the table, and the list goes on and on. We may have conquered our to-do list for that day, but you know what? We haven't allowed ourselves to care for anybody else. And even worse, we haven't let anybody else care for us in return. You know, it's very important to realize that just because something seems small and insignificant as using someone's name or remembering something that's important to them, it may not be that small to them. All we need to do is try and then give it some time, because that small act of caring may grow up into something a lot bigger. And the more we care for other people, the more that we're able to start to overflow their bucket. Sometimes you have to care a little bit more vigorously. But you know what? When we start to overflow the bucket of other people, they start to overflow ours as well. So I leave you with this today. As you go back to your homes, to your families, your friends, your jobs, remember this. When you care for others, magic happens. There's something that I want to tell you. I did tell a little bit of a fib in my speech today. Up until yesterday, everything I said in there was true. But due to the work of my wife and Delight, one of the curators for TEDx today, they actually brought Nurse Mary out here to Massachusetts to hear this talk. And there's Nurse Mary there in the white sweater. So thank you all.